The Lemurians are the original pyramid builders. They built the double pyramids of Banya and Ostretz. They were the founders of Perperikon. And they built the rampart of Sopot that held back the waters of the Paratethys Sea. The biggest and oldest megalithic sites in Bulgaria can be attributed to the Lemurians. And today, we witness their art made from stone that talks to us by its location, position, shape, and composition. Talking to stones and listening to the story of Lemuria. Subscribe below to learn more about the cosmic origins of humanity. This documentary complements the earlier one on who built the pyramids, which is linked in the description below. The largest stones at the pyramids of Bulgaria look like solidified magma. They have an abstract design and a rough finishing. They seem to have emerged as molten rock from Earth's core before being shaped into the megaliths we see today. In Rozovets, like in Begliktash, megaliths look like petrified mushrooms that sprouted from the ground. And in the central Balkan, we find huge slabs of blue-grey granite. They are the building blocks that form the levels of the pyramids. They are always bigger and positioned underneath smaller and better finished megaliths from the later Atlantean epoch, like we see in Dolny Glavanak. The layering of the stones tells us that bigger is older and smaller is newer. Rudolf Steiner's reading of the Akasha Chronicle helps us make sense of what we see on the ground. He tells us that Lemuria was a continent located in the Indian Ocean between India and Africa, and its population spread out across parts of Europe and Asia. But, more importantly, Lemuria defines an epoch in the evolution of humanity that lasted a long, very long time. It started when man first incarnated on Earth and progressively developed his material form and a budding consciousness. Lemuria marks the beginning of mankind's earthly journey, reconciling spirit and matter. During the Lemurian epoch, conditions on Earth were not like today. Air and water density were different, temperatures were higher, and matter was not yet dense like now. Minerals were soft, pliable and malleable, as we see in Skumsale, Begliktash and Mechkul. Earth's crust was thinner and volcanic eruptions were commonplace. Lemurians knew how to harness the fire from volcanic activity and transform the magma to fit their purpose. From the series of lectures, Cosmic Memory, Prehistory of Earth and Man. For Lemuria was turbulent. After all, the Earth at that time did not have its later density. The thin ground was everywhere undermined by volcanic forces, which broke forth in smaller or larger streams. Mighty volcanoes existed almost everywhere and developed a continuous destructive activity. Men were accustomed to reckoning with this fiery activity in everything they did. They also used this fire in their labors and contrivances. Their occupations were often such that the fire of nature served as a basis for them in the same way as an artificial fire does in human labor today. The Lemurian had the power to transform nature around him, and this power, cosmic in origin, is defined by Rudolf Steiner as the will. In man, the forces of nature changed into forces of the will. He himself could thereby execute what nature accomplishes. Hence, why we ask ourselves the question whether these megaliths and pyramids are natural or man-made. They are, in effect, naturally man-made. The Lemurian had the ability to transform nature like a god. Through this strength, they acted upon their environment. Other men, animals, plants, and even lifeless objects could feel this action and could be influenced purely by ideas. Now we understand how the Lemurians could build so many and such huge pyramids. They had a godlike power to create. Matter did not have the same density as today, and so the Lemurian did not have the rigid, bony structure of a body like modern humans. As a result, he was not isolated from his environment. He was an integral part of nature, and he understood it intrinsically. The Lemurian understood plants and animals in their inner action and life. He even understood the physical and chemical forces of lifeless objects in the same way. This explains why the pyramid builders understood the properties of quartz. There are links below to the documentaries on quartz and granite. Quartz is found in the composition of the granite that is used purposefully in the construction of the pyramids. And several sites like Striama, Banja and Rozovets are underpinned by a grid of quartz lines that energizes the area. The Lemurian did not need to calculate or measure in order to build. It came to him intuitively. When he built something, he did not first have to calculate the load limit of a tree trunk, the weight of a stone. He could see how much the tree trunk could bear, where the stone in view of its weight and height would fit, where it would not. Thus, the Lemurian built without engineering knowledge, on the basis of his faculty of imagination, which acted with the sureness of a kind of instinct. As we see in Rozovets, Lemurians instinctively knew how to position multi-ton megaliths teetering on the edge of a steep slope, standing on a tiny surface to make it look like it was floating in thin air. Moreover, to a great extent, he had power over his own body. When it was necessary, he could increase the strength of his arm by a simple effort of the will. For example, he could fit enormous loads merely by using his will. And yet, the finishing of the pyramids and megaliths leaves a lot to be desired. How is it possible? The Lemurian did not have a fully formed, hard, bony shell of a body that held the external organs of perceptions, such as eyes, nose, and ears. The senses, such as sight, touch, smell, taste, and hearing, were not yet developed, even by the end of the Lemurian epoch. As a result, Lemurians had blurred vision. It explains why the megaliths have a rough finishing. The Lemurians did not have sufficiently developed external organs of perception to produce a smooth finishing. They were not fully formed in a material way, but they were still strongly connected to the etheric realm. As matter became denser, mankind developed a hard skeleton and was progressively shut off from cosmic influences. The Lemurian was an extension of the spiritual forces, the higher beings, that had led him to incarnate on Earth. From the series of lectures, Rosicrucian Esotericism, Stages in the Evolution of Our Earth, Lemurian, Atlantean, Post-Atlantean Epochs, forces from the spiritual beings streamed perpetually into his physical, etheric, and astral bodies. The Lemurian was a link between earthly and cosmic realms, but he was not yet sufficiently evolved to control these influences. More so, different types of cosmic influences acted upon man. There were higher spiritual beings who contributed intelligence, but also Luciferic beings who gave him initiative and independence. The Luciferic influence had a twofold effect upon man. Firstly, a certain enthusiasm, a certain zeal could be kindled in him to do one thing or another, but this zeal was not guided by his ego, not influenced by the higher beings working in him. Secondly, it was made possible for him to secede from the higher beings, to do evil, but also to have freedom. Thus, initiative, enthusiasm, and freedom for man were due to the Luciferic beings, but the possibility of doing evil also existed. Fundamentally speaking, this is still the case today. It is they who on the one side make man free, and on the other entice him to evil. So, the Lemurian had both the power inherited from his cosmic origins and the ability to take initiative independently from the higher spiritual beings. But the Lemurian was not fully developed in body and spirit. You could say that he shared the power of the gods without their wisdom. From the series of lectures, Universe, Earth and Man. The shape which man presented outwardly was in this way a kind of betrayer of his inner being. According as his thoughts and passions were good or bad, his external shape assumed a different form. It was impossible at that time to entertain an evil thought and keep it hidden, for the external body form immediately expressed it. Therefore, man appeared in all kinds of shapes. Whatever the Lemurian felt had a direct impact around him. Emotions of anger spilt out of him as fire. Evil lusts in the soul of man had a visible magical effect in nature. They attracted the forces of fire above and on the earth. Through his evil lusts and magic will, man set the forces of nature ablaze. Today this is no longer possible, but at that time fire flashed through the air when men were evil. Through the wickedness of masses of human beings, and the fact that man succumbed too completely to the influence of the Luciferic beings and lent himself to evil, the forces of fire in Lemuria were kindled. Thus, Lemuria perished as the result of the raging fires and the wickedness of a large section of its population. We see here the convergence of biblical stories of fallen angels and the myths of giants that were eradicated by the wrath of God. And on the ground in Bulgaria, we witness the art set in stone of the pyramid builders that mastered the fiery magma to shape granite into the building blocks necessary to create the pyramids we still see today. At this point, you might be asking yourself, how did these uncontrolled, fire-belching Lemurians farting volcanic eruptions manage to build the pyramids? Well, again, Rudolf Steiner's reading of the Akasha Chronicle answers this question whilst revealing a fundamental process of human evolution. A portion of mankind was isolated and was led to a new region in the West to prepare for the next stage in the evolution of humanity, the epoch of Atlantis. Evolution is the result of distinction and separation. Some human beings proceed to evolve, whilst others stagnate. The larger part of humanity during Lemurian times did not evolve. They remained in animalism. This principle of evolution gives meaning to the stories of Noah and Moses. Steiner explains that this chosen group was led to a tropical region that was more or less free from volcanic activity. Coincidentally, it has been shown that the Black Sea basin that includes Bulgaria has at different epochs had a tropical climate, and Bulgaria has had relatively few volcanic zones. We also have to remember that the volcanic activity was provoked by the uncontrolled emotions of the Lemurians. So, the select group was chosen based on their ability to discipline their emotions and use the power of the will beneficently. And an even smaller elite group, you could call them initiates, were trained to cherish and control the will. If the Lemurian was a born magician, this talent was here developed into art and insight. Only those could be admitted who, through all kinds of discipline, had acquired the ability to overcome themselves to the greatest extent. For all others, what went on in these institutions was the deepest secret. Here one learnt to know and to control the forces of nature through direct contemplation of them. This select group of humanity cherished the knowledge emanating from the higher spiritual beings, whilst disciplining their luciferic instincts. They stood on earth whilst receiving higher knowledge from the cosmic realm. It is during the late Lemurian epoch that human beings were separated into sexes. Each had its own role. Men cultivated the will, whilst women communed with the higher beings. The women looked into the creative workshop of nature. They experienced a communion with the beings which built the world itself. One can call this communication an association with the gods. They thereby developed special human powers. Their faculty of imagination, which was in alliance with nature, became the basis for a higher development of the life of ideas. Women developed the power of imagination. They were enthused with images from the higher spiritual beings, whilst the men cherished the power of the will. Together, they created temples of divine wisdom and art. For, in their temples, they participated in direct contemplation of the active forces of nature. They looked into the creative workshop of nature. They experienced a communion with the beings which built the world itself. One can call this communication an association with the gods. These temples are the pyramids and megalithic sites we still see today across Bulgaria. In the earliest times, they originated in the desire to give to the things of nature a man-made form. Hills were remodeled in such a way that the form afforded man joy and pleasure. Stones were put together for the same purpose, or in order to be used for certain activities. Rudolf Steiner's reading of the Akasha Chronicle explains why and how the Lemurians built so many and such huge pyramids. In summary, this select group of Lemurians was enthused by divine harmony and blessed with divine will. Matter at the time was pliable, and they had an intuitive understanding of granite and quartz because there was no hard physical barrier separating them. And they could discipline their luciferic instincts and focus on the divine wisdom streaming from above. All in all, it explains why the pyramids point up to the heavens and why they are turned towards the sun. Lemurians were invested by higher spirits with images of divine harmony. The sacred geometry found in the proportions of the pyramids and truths about Earth's position in relation to the sun, such as precession, are messages of divine wisdom cast in stone by the Lemurians. Rudolf Steiner's reading of the Akasha Chronicle helps us make sense of what we see on the ground. It is also a guide for understanding the pyramids and megalithic sites across the world. Finally, the Lemurian epoch ended with a catastrophe brought on by fire. Lemuria was engulfed by the fiery volcanoes of the luciferic instincts that most Lemurians could not control. In the next documentary, we will follow the journey, told in stone, of the select group that gave rise to the next epoch of humanity, Atlantis, that eventually perished by water. Click and subscribe to be notified.